Hi everyone, thank you for attending my talk. And before I'm going to present my paper, I'd like to thank first the organizing committee of the International Conference on Language, Literature, and Translation Studies 2020 for inviting me as one of the speakers of this conference. It's an honor for me to present and share my research to all the attendees of this conference. Before I'm going to start my presentation, I'd like to introduce myself first. I am Dr. Francisco Dumanig, an Assistant Professor of English at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. I'm a former senior lecturer at the Faculty of Languages and Linguistics at the University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I also taught previously in several universities in the Philippines, Malaysia, and the Middle East. My current research focuses on the family language policy of Filipinos in Hawaii, education and language in the Philippines, and caregivers' interaction with elderly patients in adult residential care homes. I publish some research articles in peer-reviewed journals such as Cambridge Language Teaching Journal, Journal of Multilingual and Multicultural Development, World English's Multilingual Language Policy, and International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism. My areas of expertise are teaching English as a second or foreign language, global Englishes, and Southeast Asian Englishes, discourse analysis, focusing more particularly on language and identity, language planning and language policy, and social linguistics. My presentation today is about the impact of culture in teaching English as a foreign language and focusing more on the perspective of the non-native English teachers. Before I'm going to proceed to the content of this presentation, I'd like to show you first the outline of this presentation. First, I'm going to discuss on the direction of the study, followed by language and culture. Then I'm going to present to you the intercultural language learning, which is the theoretical framework of this research, and English language teaching in Oman because we got the data from Oman. And I'm going to discuss with you the methodology, then followed by the results and analysis. Then I'll be showing to you the pedagogical implications of this research. This study would like to explore how non-native English language teachers integrate culture in teaching English as a foreign language, and it also examines the teacher's beliefs as to what culture is deemed helpful in achieving a better learning experience of students studying English as a foreign language. In this research, I'm really interested to know whether the target language culture may influence more the learners to learn English as a foreign language or as a second language, or it can be the learner's culture that may influence more in their learning of English as a second language or as a foreign language, or it can be the teacher's culture. We know that language is really essential and it is important in teaching and learning, and in fact it is used as a tool for human communication. And it is also considered as complex because it is open, dynamic, energetic, constantly evolving, and personal. Since language is used to communicate and to interact with people, we could say that language is a social practice where it is used as a form of or as a tool to communicate and socially interact with others, which means that one of its roles is meaning making and interpretation, which goes beyond vocabulary and grammar. And we can also say that language can be used to create and construct meaning through the process of communication. So here we see how language plays a very important role in communication, in learning, and in teaching as well. Language and culture always go together. Part of the culture is language and part of the language is culture. Culture is a framework where people live their lives and communicate shared meanings with each other. It forms our beliefs, it conveys our ideas, and shares knowledge and customs and values which are communicated through language. So you see here how language plays an important role in creating the culture. So culture is also essential in meaning making and interpretation of meaning. And remember that when language is used and communicated, it is always interpreted or understood depending on the cultural understanding of the receiver. Therefore, teaching and learning must bring the learners to their own understanding of their own culture in order for them to enhance their intercultural understanding as they continually engage with others through communication. So here you can see the link between language and culture and their importance in communication, particularly in teaching and learning. It is important to note here that it is essential for the learners to understand first their own culture before they can be effective in intercultural communication. So, based on those ideas, we can say that language and culture are strongly linked together, where the language used is dictated by its cultural values. And to learn the culture, it requires language to transmit attitudes, ideas, and values from one generation to another. So, in order for you to transmit, the culture from one generation to the other, then you need language. Language is used as a tool. And so therefore, in learning a second or foreign language does not only require the linguistic form or the linguistic competence of the learners, but it also needs familiarity of the culture. It is evident that integrating culture in a language classroom can be an effective method to enhance the learner's knowledge of the target language. However, it remains a question on what culture is taught by non-native English teachers to their foreign language learners. This study explores whether non-native English language teachers integrate the English culture or their own culture or the learner's culture in teaching English as a foreign language. This further examines a teacher's beliefs as to how culture is deemed helpful in achieving a better learning experience of students. Globalization has increased the movements of people from one place to another. Coupled with technological development, accessibility to communicate and interact with people in almost all parts of the world are quicker and convenient. Such globalization and technological advancement also increases the importance of English for global communication. With these developments, it also affects the teaching and learning of English, either as a second language or as a foreign language. Being able to communicate globally, cultural understanding becomes an essence in language learning. Language can be learned easily when it is coupled with cultural understanding. The teaching of English then must be intercultural because learners need to understand the culture of other speakers. Several varieties of English are emerging, and when learners are exposed to this group of people, they need to be linguistically and culturally competent. This paper is anchored from the concept of intercultural language learning, or ICLL, which argues that the learning of a language involves developing with learners an understanding of their own language and culture in relation to an additional language and culture. It is a dialogue that allows for reaching a common ground for negotiation to take place, and where variable points of view are recognized, mediated, and accepted. Intercultural language learning highlights the importance of learners' understanding of their culture and of their own language and the target language in order to make connections between their own culture and the cultures of others. Learners engaged in intercultural language learning develop a reflective stance towards language and culture, both specifically as instances of first, second, and additional languages and cultures, and generally as understandings of the variable ways in which language and culture exist in the world. Learners need to understand how their values, beliefs, and social practices affect the way they use their own language and eventually explore the cultural influences of the target language. This notion basically argues that learners must develop their intercultural competence to better understand the similarities and differences of how their language is used as compared to the target language. Culture shapes the way language is structured and used. It is also through intercultural language learning that it enhances the learner's communicative competence both in oral and written discourses. Since this paper examines the non-native English teachers' perspectives on the importance of culture in English language teaching, so we collected the data from Oman, where most of the English teachers are coming from Asian countries and some other Arab countries, and with few teachers coming from the native English speaking countries. So I would just want to provide you a background knowledge about the English language teaching in Oman. So we know that English continues to be the most widely used language in many parts of the world. With the emergence of globalization, the demand of English continues to rise. Consequently, the speakers and the varieties of English continue to increase. In Oman, the importance of English is gaining more popularity. As a result, it is introduced as a subject in schools, colleges, and universities. According to Al-Busaidi, the use of English in Oman has become an institutionalized domain, which is used in business, media, and education. Furthermore, English is also used as the medium of instruction in private and public higher education throughout the country. Despite the development of English in Oman, English is considered as a foreign language since English is still used in limited domains of communication. According to Kutcher in his three-circled model of Englishes, that speakers of English are categorized into three groups, such as the inner circle, which includes the native speakers, such as people from the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, while the outer circle includes a number of second language speakers of English, such as those in India, Singapore, Philippines, and other countries where English is used as a second language. On the other hand, the expanding circle includes speakers for whom English is a foreign language, such as those in Japan, China, Korea, Oman, and other countries where English is a foreign language. In countries where English is widely spoken, speakers tend to use the nativized variety of English for intra-communication, which is seen to be more advantageous because speakers share similar linguistic and pragmatic knowledge about the variety of English used. English as a foreign language in Oman has played an important role in developing the learning of English among Omani learners. However, the use of English is somehow limited due to limited opportunities where English is spoken. Such limitation eventually influences the students' development in English language learning because the language is not enhanced outside the classroom. This study specifically investigates the teacher's beliefs as to what culture is deemed helpful in achieving a better learning experience of students studying English as a foreign language. To carry out this study, 20 non-native EFL teachers from Asian countries who have been teaching English in Oman were interviewed to explore which culture must be integrated in foreign language teaching. A diverse group of teachers coming from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds took part in the study that includes Filipinos, Indians, and Arab teachers. The interviews were conducted online for a period of 2 months from March 2019 until April 2019. All participants were asked to answer the questions through a Google form link. So it was conducted online. The interviews focused on the integration of culture in an English language class. Emphasis were given on the target culture, teacher's culture, and learner's culture, or what we call also as the local culture. Although the interviews were online, ongoing discussions were also done as a follow-up. The interviews collected were transcribed and analyzed using the thematic analysis that includes the teacher's beliefs, the target language culture, the language teacher's culture, and the language learner's culture. All interviews were coded and grouped the codes, and the codes were grouped according to themes, and the themes were layered. So generally, in analyzing the data, I used this thematic analysis. Based on the interviews conducted, the teacher's beliefs are categorized into three, such as culture-centered learning is student-centered, localizes a second or foreign language, and encourages the use of authentic materials in the classroom. It is believed that culture-centered learning is student-centered. Foreign language teachers also believe that in order to make language learning more effective, then it must be student-centered. Integrating culture to language learning may result to student-centered focused kind of learning. Language learning should not be centered only to the language itself, but it must include how the learners understand and use the language appropriately. Consequently, classes become more engaging and students are getting more involved in class discussion and other activities. According to Weimer, that a learner-centered teaching engages students and encourages them to reflect on what they are learning and how they're learning it. In fact, one of the participants mentioned that, "I think my opinion is clear now, but classes should be student-centered and tailored towards their culture-based knowledge when possible. Of course, other cultures can be introduced, especially during listening or reading, but if possible, draw these topics back to their culture when producing language." Liddicoat emphasized the importance of learners' understanding of their own culture and how their culture shapes their language structure and use. When learners fully understand their own language and culture, then it would be easy for them to explore and learn the culture of the target language. Another thing is that localizing the culture of a second or foreign language may help the learners to integrate their own culture to the target culture. It will help them to identify the similarities and differences of their own culture and the target language. Cultural integration in language learning is referred by the participants to the familiar culture of the learners. This means that language learning does not only occur through the culture of the language itself, but it has something to do with the familiar culture of the learners, which is their own culture. In a way, this is one method of localizing a foreign or a second language so that language can be fully felt and understood by the learners. And one of the participants said that integration of their culture helps improve it. Students can speak or write about the background knowledge with greater ease than they can in other cultures. Fluency practice shouldn't require students to learn new information. Instead, talk about subjects that they are familiar with. If I want students to practice with a target structure, I will choose situations they're familiar with. Likewise, if I'm asking students to write, I would expect them to refer their opinions and experiences, which inevitably stem from their own cultural backgrounds. Integrating culture in language learning encourages the use of authentic materials in language classroom. The use of authentic materials in the classroom is viewed as an effective tool in language learning. However, many reading sources and other teaching materials have preconceived ideas on what the learners are supposed to read and use where the learners could not relate. It is viewed by second or foreign language teachers as problematic because students may not understand the context. Learning a second or foreign language requires understanding the context to fully understand its actual use. Some of the participants are actually commenting on this. They said that the majority of English teaching materials assume a base knowledge of cultural items and ideas. And one of the participants also mentioned that having taught in the Middle East or Southeast Asia and East Asia, I have sometimes found this problematic. They also say that students have often overcome a cultural knowledge barrier as well as a language barrier with many English language teaching resources or course book. Many non-native English language teachers also believe that integrating culture in language teaching enhances the learner's intercultural competence. And in fact, one of the participants commented that many students learn to adjust to communicate to other people when culture is integrated in teaching English as a foreign language, and they can easily adjust when talking to native and non-native users of English. This diagram illustrates how communicative competence is achieved through intercultural language learning, where the learner's culture and the target culture and other cultures are mixed together when learners learn their own culture and at the same time learn the target culture and at the same time learn other cultures that would result to communicative competence. Non-native English language teachers also believe that integrating the learner's culture in language learning may help in developing a more student-centered language teaching. Developing cultural self-awareness is essential in achieving cross-cultural intellectual competence. When students are becoming familiar of their own culture, then eventually they develop a better understanding of their own cultures. According to Martin and Nakayama, they suggest that students be engaged in the practice of self-reflexivity, a process by which individuals come to understand themselves and their position in a society and learn to recognize the strengths and limitations of their own intercultural experiences. Putting the learner's culture as the core in language learning may transform classes to be more student-centered. In the interviews conducted, the teachers commented that one of them said that, "I believe it is more important to integrate the learner's culture into language teaching." Other participants also said that if the language relates to students' interest, experience and knowledge they can draw on, they will be able to connect with the language more efficiently. And students are able to relate, thus they're able to express their ideas. It is also believed that culture-specific language teaching is also achieved when teachers integrate the learner's culture in language learning. Language teaching should always be culture-specific to the learner's culture. Celia argues that learning a language in isolation of its cultural roots prevents one from becoming socialized into its contextual use. Knowledge of linguistic structure alone does not carry with it any special insights into the political, social, religious, or economic system, or even insight into when you should talk and when you should not. The participants also mentioned that knowing the learner's customs, values, and communicative norms helps them to facilitate learning, and integrating language learners' cultures in class will help them use the language. The learner's schemata should always be considered. Non-native English language teachers also believe the importance of the target culture. They believe that integrating the target culture in a language classroom would be effective in language teaching. Studies have shown that learning the target culture helps in learning a second or foreign language, and it is believed that language learning requires the learners to learn the culture of the target language, when and how to use the language appropriately. In short, learners must develop an intercultural competence. Non-native English teachers believe that foreign language learners need to understand the target language culture, but have to be more familiar of the culture as to where the language be used. The participants of this study believe that the target language is important to be introduced when learners develop certain level of language proficiency. And one participant also commented that as an English language teacher, he believes that target culture is necessary so that learners can effectively communicate not just with people of their own culture, but for the native speakers too. Non-native English language teachers also believe that integrating the target culture in the language classroom may enhance foreign language learners' vocabulary and grammar. And in fact, they say that I could say that when students are introduced to the target culture, they begin to learn new vocabularies and eventually improve their grammar. And another participant said that integrating the target language culture helps the learners to be more aware whether the language that they learn is right or not. So it's just like the target culture becomes now the basis whether they are using the language appropriately and correctly. Introducing the target language culture in a language class may help the learners to familiarize the English speakers' idioms. What I am saying here is that they would be more familiar with the idiomatic expressions used by the native speakers. So there are so many idiomatic expressions that are not commonly used among foreign language learners in their own culture, and when they learn the target when they are familiar with the target language culture, then they would be more familiar also with the common idiomatic expressions that are used by native speakers. One participant of this research commented that there are some idiomatic expressions that are commonly used only by native speakers, and students learn the proper use of such idioms when they are introduced to the target language culture. One more thing which is also very important in integrating the target language culture in a language class is that it would allow your learner to become more culturally sensitive. Sensitive not just of their own culture, but also become sensitive on the culture of others. And when I say the culture of others, that would be the target language culture. One participant said that based on my experience, the integration of target language culture in class, especially in a foreign language class, provides students the opportunity to learn how the native speakers communicate, and it helps them to learn how to interact with other cultures. Knowing the target language culture may also help the learners to learn the culturally appropriate ways of speaking when using the target language. And the participants say that majority of my students will study and work in the Middle East, and they will be speaking English for work mainly to Western and non-Western English speakers. Learning the target culture may help them to understand better when talking to different speakers of English. It is also very important to look at here the language teacher's culture, because the teacher is more exposed to students in the classroom. And in this study, we tried to look at also whether language teachers could be influential to students' learning. And based on the perceptions of the teachers, they believe that language teachers' culture would have less impact to students' learning. So they believe that teachers' own culture may not influence much, the students' learning. And some of the teachers commented that teachers sometimes impose their own culture in class, but I think this culture is the least important. And they also say that sometimes unconsciously they integrate their own culture as a teacher, and this is not common, but in a way perhaps it also contributes, but the contribution is not just, it's just a little, so not that much. They also believe that the language teacher's culture may establish good relationship with students. So perhaps this one would be the benefit of introducing the teacher's culture in the classroom. They believe that sometimes teachers could be a good tool to let your learners know about your background, including your cultural issues, and students will know how to communicate with you in class, and it somehow facilitates a better learning experience for students. The participants also believe that integrating language teachers' culture in the classroom could be a form of unconscious integration of culture. They say that sometimes language teachers unintentionally integrate their own culture in class. And they further say that we sometimes share our own views, interpretations, and understanding to our students, which are basically influenced by our individual culture. One participant from India said that, "I'm from India and I sometimes interpret meaning differently from other teachers from the Philippines and or in Oman, and that's how the teacher is actually sharing with the class." So by sharing his own perspective in the classroom, it's somehow already sharing or integrating his own culture to his class. So to conclude their findings of the study, I could say that teaching English as a foreign language requires teachers to expose students to various cultures to be more communicatively competent. So it is very important for you to allow your students to be familiar with different cultures, not just their own culture, but also the target culture and even the teacher's culture. English language teaching becomes more effective when it is culturally contextualized, because that is where they learn when and how the language will be used appropriately. And the use of authentic and cultural relevant materials are seen to be effective to foreign language learners. This is very essential because this is where the students would be able to relate to the materials that are used in the classroom. So if the materials that are used are culturally relevant to the learners, then the learners would easily understand, the materials that they are using or the materials that they are reading. So authentic materials is really essential in integrating culture in the classroom. Introducing the learner's culture, the teacher's culture, and the target culture is one way of exposing learners to intercultural communication, or we call now as global communication, and eventually develop the students or the learner's communicative competence. Intercultural language learning facilitates better learning and encourages teachers to be more student-centered. And it is always important to assess first the learner's needs before introducing them to a particular culture. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your time. Mahalo. And please let me know if you have some questions. Thank you.